shit regardless.
I know you've talked a lot about Austrian economics. And so, I spend my time talking about why Bitcoin is important. And so obviously I spend a lot of time on the economic side, the philosophy side, the politics side. And it seems like Austrian economics kind of encompasses most of that. So tell me, I guess, how you see that economic philosophy as opposed to kind of what we have now, and why that system you think might be better.
Right. So I come from that perspective in terms of an Austrian economic analysis of the world, and I guess it informs my worldview, and that is part of I inject that into my interviews and people I interview. So in terms of what's different about the Austrian perspective versus, let's say, the current mainstream perspective is more
Whatever it
like
is, right?
Austrians see no role for central banking, as in no productive role for central banking. It's seen as like a political um, outgrowth of the state, and that it can cause all kinds of problems in the market, which it's referred to as the boom bust cycle, or also known as Austrian business cycle theory. So Austrian economists tend to be, they are more free market. They believe in free market capitalism. They believe, and they talk more about this idea of bottom up, spontaneous order, right? And if we were going to get a bit more technical, it's more like it's really looking specifically at the choices and actions that humans make and how can you deduce them. So the method specifically is kind of more like, think of it more like logically deducing certain truths and understanding and applying those into the real world, and trying to use that to understand a little bit better what's going on. Now, in practice, what does that mean? It means anti-central bank, anti-fiat money, generally pro-free market, generally looking for ways to help articulate and explain why we should have free trade. We should encourage the productivity and production through accumulation of capital, as opposed to maybe a more Keynesian point of view, which is more like consumption first. Whereas an Austrian might tend to focus a little bit more on this idea that, no, you need to save and then be able to produce more, and then you can consume more. So I guess that hopefully that helps.
Yeah, you said something that probably put a whole bunch of people on their head, and you kind of came straight out and you said no central banks, and then you said something that even went a little bit further that probably really threw people off, and you said that central banks cause boom and bust cycles, but it seems that the common belief today is that it's free market capitalism that causes booms and bust cycles. So do you want to explain that?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And so I think the Austrians, when you read them, think of it like this. We should expect to see, just in normal capitalism, some businesses growing and some failing, just as normal as you would expect. That's just normal. But why is it that we see a cluster of errors in a certain area over time? And so historically, whether that's the dot-com bubble or whether it's, housing bubble or etc., why is it that we see that? And it's actually that there's a reason, there's an underlying cause for that. Now, if you listen to the mainstream media, they might say something like, "Oh, see, it's just it just comes and goes. It's like seasons. It's just going to be with us for all of time, and we just have to deal with it. And the central bank needs to step in and manage it, and they need to try to have stable prices and look after the employment rate and these kinds of things." Where, from an Austrian perspective, it's to try and look back and wait a minute, what's the cause of that? Try and trace back what is the underlying cause of this. And so in the Austrian view, it's more like, hold on, it's actually credit expansion that drives all of this stuff. So put simply, government interventions, such as the existence of the central bank, the lender of last resort, some of these things, they push the interest rate, they artificially depress it below what it would be in a true free market. And so in that sense, it causes people to get the wrong signal, right? So prices are like a signal. They're like an information. They're like saying, hey, come here, use this product, use these resources because there's a profit opportunity. And if there's a profit opportunity, you're being productive for the rest of society. That's kind of one way to think of it. And so central banking is viewed as like a government intervention into capitalism rather than being a function of capitalism. And so in that view, it's more like central banking helps enable government to kind of take more command over the economy. And so it essentially drives this boom and bust cycle because a lot of entrepreneurs get given the wrong signal in some sense. It's like the market's signals have been messed with.
Yep.
And in doing so, all these entrepreneurs run into a certain area. And for the last 40 or 50 years or whatever, it's been a lot of that has been property, right? Think how many people are property entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not clear that that is actually like that is what would have happened if we were living under a fully free market with zero government central bank.
Yep.
And so I think that is essentially coming around to this idea that if it weren't for government central banking, we would not see this boom and bust cycle that we have seen every 6 or 7 years historically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, part of it, these are complex subjects to understand because you have to kind of have disciplines in several areas. And so you mentioned earlier, like, human action. And so like, you kind of have to understand like human motivation and human action in that human intent, because as you said, it is a little bit like cycles, right? Cycles do come and go. I love vanilla ice cream and all of a sudden I want chocolate. I don't know why I want chocolate. I just do. And so we're going to want different things. And so there are going to be booms and busts. And that's just natural. Some businesses start and some fail. But I think to your point, they're creating this artificial demand, which forces everybody or entices everyone into certain sectors, which causes them to get way bigger and then crash, which leads to bigger booms and busts. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And it's complex, but at the same time, it seems like the Fed tries to make it so complex that we don't understand and that we have to depend on them, when really, as you said, if you break it down into those principles, it's actually pretty easy to understand.